Welcome to City Talk. I'm your host, Chris Moriconi. The purpose of the show is to inform and educate you on issues impacting our communities right here in Kenton County. And I'm pleased to get started with today's episode. We have Mayor Dave Hatter, the great city of Fort Wright.
As always, thanks for having me on, Chris.
Thanks for being on once again, Mayor. And then we also have a great guest today, Mr. Steve Hensley, who is the director of the Kenton County Homeland Emergency Management. I had to write that down because you got such a long title.
Well, thank you for having me as well.
Well, I appreciate both of you being here. And what this topic we're going to focus on a lot is what a lot of our viewers have probably been hearing about is the Brent Spence Bridge project and how that's going to impact the region, but more importantly, Northern Kentucky. Because the key with this bridge is, and we talked about it earlier, is it's more than just a bridge. It's about an 8-mile long project that stretches 4 miles into Ohio and then 4 miles south into Kentucky. And probably the actual bridge construction is probably the most simplistic part of the project in terms of they're building a brand new bridge next to the Brent Spence, correct?
That is correct.
So what we wanted to focus on is on the impacts, and there's a lot of questions here that I came up with that I think you'll like. But really, there's so many moving parts to the on-off ramp. So, and I know, Steve, you've been involved a lot of planning with KYTC, which is Kenton County Transportation Cabinet. So why don't you kick things off by start talking about those meetings and what led to them and where they're headed?
Well, our first responder group, as you know, we meet with our police chiefs and fire chiefs on a monthly basis. The conversation has come up from people that have responsibility in the I-75 corridor, not only about how they are going to access, but how they're going to make access for emergency response. And then the conversation kind of expanded because we know that there are transportation agencies as far south as Lexington that on occasion transport to Children's Hospital and the University Hospital.
Wow.
And how are we going to be able to communicate to them what's open, what's not, and what is the best mechanism for them to understand and get that information to make the transport and to try to be there as efficiently and effectively as they can and not find themselves stuck in traffic for extended periods of time.
Well, that's interesting. So if this project could indirectly impact as far south as Lexington, I'm assuming it could impact far north as Dayton.
Oh, absolutely. It touches. Initially, the planning group from KYTC thought that initially we should just meet with the city of Erlanger north to Covington because that was going to be the most impacted agencies. Now, they do have large portions of the I-75 corridor, so I certainly understand that from their perspective. Yeah. However, when you look at it from a regional perspective, it's very, very obvious that anytime there's a backup or there's a problem on the I-75 corridor, we all know what happens. Dixie Highway becomes gridlocked, and then in addition to that, the 275, 471 corridor gets gridlocked as well. So we had to expand this scope of these meetings to include a much larger group of people.
So to that point, what's going to happen with rerouting trucks and all that on 275, 471? I mean, I envision, the main bridge is going to remain open during construction, right?
That is correct.
So why would there be a need to reroute if there is?
Well, what we anticipate is going to happen based on our planning meetings is based on what we know because of history associated with the closure of the Brent Spence Bridge for the prior event that caused about a 5-week closure.
Oh, yeah.
We learned a lot of lessons, some good, some not so good. And we start talking about traffic flows and traffic being rerouted. One of the problems we experienced was the Waze app, the Google Earth app, and there are many others out there that try to redirect traffic to the most readily available route. Well, what was happening is the I-75 corridor was obviously compromised as a result of the accident, so it was routing people off into downtown Covington. Well, that translates into a bunch of commercial motor vehicles being routed off onto the 5th Street exit, thinking that they can go across the suspension bridge. Well, we know that the weight limit on this suspension bridge doesn't support semis, and unfortunately, the truck drivers that were making that as an alternative route didn't realize that until they got to the apron of the bridge.
Wow.
So we had absolute gridlock. So we're trying to get ahead of that and communicating. The design and development team for the bridge is communicating with these folks to try to come up with alternatives so that that doesn't happen again. And then in addition to that, we also learned that the importance of the emergency strips and access to the emergency strips for first responders and those type things. And KYTC, during the Brent Spence Bridge project, they contracted a sweeping company that would actually come through a couple times a day and make sure that the emergency strips were clean and clear of debris, so that when first responders needed to access those, they didn't have to worry about compromising their tires and their vehicles or throwing debris into the travel portion of the roadway and damaging other vehicles.
Wow, a lot of moving parts.
Well,
so
there are.
You're kind of, the past incidents have become teachable moments for the future.
Absolutely. With every event like that, we sit down, we try to hot wash, we identify what went well, what could have been improved upon, and lessons learned. And we try to implement those lessons learned into our emergency response plans that I think are going to be very relevant during this upcoming project, because this is not going to be a 5-week project, it's going to be a multiple year project.
How many years is this expected to take? You knew that was coming. I'm not going to put you on this.
I expect to be dead by the time it's myself. You know.
Well,
We
close in age.
We
I
have
don't
been
know.
told to expect a minimum of 5 years.
Okay.
I suspect it'll be probably closer to 10 with all the collateral work and the different things that are going on. If you drive by our Kenton County building right now at 1840 Simon Kenton Way, you'll see there's work that's already been initiated. Mm-hmm. Half of our front parking lot has been taken up because of construction. There's going to be some significant utility work that's going to occur, and other things that are happening as a result. The parking garage that's been built behind our building at 1840 Simon Kenton Way is as a result of losing the I-75 parking that we have underneath the I-75 across from our county building there. We negotiated a lease with the Commonwealth of Kentucky, and we were parking vehicles there to have additional parking. We lost that, so as a result of that, we had to build a parking garage in the rear of the building in order to have plenty of available parking, not only for the employees, but to free up the front surface lot for the customers that visit the building on a daily basis.
Yeah, so parking under the underpass of the expressway is now, you can't do that anymore?
Well, currently it still exists, but within a few months it will no longer exist. And as a result of the construction, a lot of that area that's currently elevated will be built at grade once the final construction is complete.
Well, before we get to the break with Mayor Hatter, are you, I'm sure you're aware of the impacts. What would the impacts be on Fort Wright during and after construction? What's going to change?
Well, as you know, Chris, Fort Wright is sort of at the center of everything. You can't really go north or south in Kenton County without going through Fort Wright, whether it's on 275, 75, Dixie Highway, or 17. So, you know, we've been concerned about this for a long time. Obviously, the bridge is necessary. As someone who spends a substantial amount of their time as a consultant all over the greater tri-state region, you know, the bridge is long overdue for an improvement. So I'm all for that.
Right.
But when you think about the full scope of this, as Steve mentioned, right? I mean, this is a very large project. It's not just the bridge, it's all the overpasses on either side of the river for a substantial amount of the way. It's substantial changes to the road, which, again, my personal opinion is in the long run, these are all beneficial. You know, they're going to replace the overpass in Fort Wright, the overpass in Fort Mitchell. We've had extensive conversations with KYTC D6 about the aesthetics and the flow of that. Apparently the plan now is roundabouts. We have mixed feelings about that. I'm not sure where Fort Mitchell stands on that. I believe it calls for roundabouts in their plan. So yeah, it's going to be pretty substantial. And, you know, without the roundabouts, that takes longer to rebuild than what they're proposing. Again, all of this is preliminary. I encourage people, if you're really interested in this, go to BrentSpenceCorridor.com, right? There's a website where you can see all the latest plans. But I think it's going to be, well, again, in the long run, Chris, I think it's going to be a good thing. I think in the short run, once the construction starts on these overpasses, it's going to be very difficult to go east-west in Fort Wright or Fort Mitchell because you've got the expressway there and this overpass. And to Steve's point, and I'm really glad they're doing all the analysis he mentioned, because once the bridge gets shut down to Newport, that creates even further choke points in the north, south, east, west transition as you get into the northernmost tip of Kentucky. It's going to be really interesting, for example, when you do have some sort of major traffic incident, because you're going to have all these different choke points, and I would encourage people to think patience.
Yeah.
Patience. You're going to need a lot of patience probably once this project gets underway.
Yeah, but now you mentioned the overpass. You bring up a good point. So I-75 basically cuts Fort Wright in half.
It does.
So
Almost exactly in half.
yeah, I haven't thought about it in that perspective. So what, they're going to shut the overpass down?
No. Well, again, it sort of depends on what their ultimate plan is. The original plan, which would have just been to more or less do what they have now, right? Tear one side down, rebuild it, build the other side. Well, that's not the plan. As I understand it at the moment, the plan is now you would keep the existing bridge, put a new one in beside it with the roundabouts, and then tear the old one down. That's how I currently understand it. So you would still potentially have more access that way. But just imagine all of this construction, and anyone that drives through that area during rush hour or when there's an event on 75 knows how insane the Dixie Highway area gets there already. So yeah, again, it'll be interesting to see what the final plan calls for. We haven't seen that. We've seen various plans. The one thing I will say is there's going to be a huge aesthetic improvement, which is something I've been trying to get now for well over a decade. It's hard for me to understand, Chris, how I can drive across the river into Ohio, drive to, let's say, Evendale, and it looks like Gandalf's, wizard shop up there, and yet I got a chain link fence and some bad concrete on the overpass there in Fort Wright. So excited about the opportunity for some aesthetic improvements. We'll have to see what the final plan actually does. But again, I encourage people to be patient and think about alternate routes, because it's going to get tricky once this gets into full swing.
Well, I want to talk a little bit more about the roundabouts, because in Independence we have quite a few already and several more coming. But we're going to take a short break and continue our discussion with the Brent Spence Bridge project. We'll be right back with more City Talk.
You're tuned in to another episode of NKY Sports Mania. We're looking at the entire season.
Everyone has a voice, so why not put yours to use with the help of the TBNK Podcast Studio? With the help of one of our TBNK employees, Kenton County residents can easily create professional-sounding podcasts at no charge. There's even the option for video.
How gnarly are the waves on the Ohio River? Well, I can definitely tell you this much.
Don't forget, while you can upload your podcast to the internet, it will also be played on our local community TV channels across Altifiber and Spectrum. So get ready for all of that incoming stardom headed your way.
And I want to talk about some of the sickest bands.
To learn more and begin your podcast journey, email create@tbnk.org or call TBNK at 859-261-1300. Remember, it's your voice. Use it at TBNK.
We're back with more City Talk. I'm your host, Chris Moriconi, and we're going to continue our discussion on the massive Brent Spence Bridge project. As I mentioned earlier, it's actually an 8-mile corridor that we're all going to enjoy for many years during construction. But Mayor Hatter, I wanted to get back real quick to the roundabouts, because I don't know what kind they're planning, but I know we have some already in Independence. We have more coming. They seem to work great. Ours are double lanes. They really work effectively once people learn how to use them. With these roundabouts, now when you said you haven't seen a final plan, I guess I'm confused. If they're starting construction and it's been budgeted, how would they not have a final plan yet for overpasses?
So as I understand it, and I may not remember this term, they have a term for this. Something dynamic design, or maybe you remember, Steve, but the idea that in order to move faster and potentially save money as the situation changes, they're not doing everything all at once, which actually I think makes sense. They've come up with different plans, and as I understand it from the last email I got from them, and we're trying to get another meeting scheduled, they're probably not even going to start work on that until like 2030. So again, that's why when you say this is all going to be done in 5 years, I'm saying I doubt that that's the case. again, nothing's final, and I don't want to put words in their mouth. All in all, they've been really easy to work with on the pieces that impact Fort Wright. But, I mean, again, you can go online. Anyone that's interested in this, we've got a link to it from the Fort Wright website. You can go to BrentSpenceCorridor.com and see what they're proposing. But ideally, at the either end of the current overpass there on Kyles Lane, you'd have a roundabout, right? And you're coming off the expressway into a roundabout on, from those intersections.
Okay.
Theoretically, it could work better. There's been some concerns about the proposed design. And again, roundabouts obviously new to Fort Wright. Their engineering seems to show how it could work. It doesn't seem to me like there's enough space, especially up on the Walgreens side at Dixie and Kyles. But they seem to think that it could work. So that's kind of where we're at on that. But as far as the most recent information shared with us, that's what's in the plan. And Steve, I'm assuming you haven't heard anything different at this point.
Exactly what you've just shared is what we have heard up to this point.
So for our viewers and those especially in the Fort Wright area, so if I'm heading south on I-75, I'm leaving Cincinnati and I'm coming up the hill and all the trucks are in the right two lanes and I'm starting to have anxiety because I got to get over to get off at Fort Wright.
The trucks in there, don't even get me started on that.
So will that ramp will stay open? I thought, so that ramp and...
As far as I know, yes, unless you know something that I don't know, Steve.
No.
Yeah, I mean,
I don't think there's a plan to do away with any ramps. There'll be some modifications, but even these drawings kind of depict that.
Yes, so now are you asking about specifically during construction or in general?
During construction and after the project's done, does that exit ramp stay there?
I mean, there may be some nominal movement where where it interfaces with the roundabout, but as far as I know, it more or less will be the same. Okay,
because years ago when this was being brought up, I know there was one design that...
Well, it used to be like the cloverleaf thing there, way back in the day.
Well, yeah, but I even heard that one of the exit ramps might have closed permanently, would be either Fort Wright or the one in Fort Mitchell by the Mercedes-Benz dealership. It sounds like those are going to stay open, which is good for the businesses.
Yeah, I am unaware of any changes like that in Fort Wright or Fort Mitchell at this point.
Yeah, and we have had no discussion in any of our meetings about any of the ramps closing permanently.
That's great news. And this might have been a draft, oh gosh, I think I did a report on this project working on my master's degree. Years ago, I did a study on this, and I think that was one of the things, but strike that from the record. That's not happening. Apparently.
They will tell you that this is a living project and things change. And in fact, just a few examples to follow up on what the mayor said. In some of our planning meetings where we have talked about concerns associated with emergency responses and how far, just for an example, a Covington first responder would have to go into Ohio in order to make the flip to come back in order to access the bridge on the southbound side. And the same thing is true, and based on what you were talking about, Mayor Hatter, is how far the city of Covington, we use again for an example, how far south do they have to come in order to make the turnabout to get back to northbound 75, and then defining what lane they need to be in, whether they're getting on the companion bridge to respond to an accident or whether they're getting on the existing bridge to respond to an accident, and how that's going to translate into minutes lost in these responses. Now, initially, there was not a lot of discussion as to preparation for emergency response vehicles to be able to make cut-throughs and to be able to have more efficient, more effective access. As a result of these planning meetings, there's been some modifications made to the plans, and there will be more efficient ways for those first responders to make access to those crash sites, or whether it be a hazardous materials event or whatever the case may be, because that was a great concern to us, is the significant delays that were going to be created and caused by this construction, and how far you have, because we all know what happens, things get gridlocked as soon as the accident occurs. So if you have to go 2 miles south of it in order to come back north, that's going to impact your response time, and we know minutes equate to lives. And then another concern that we had, and hopefully it's consistent with your meetings, is going to be if we're sending a Covington first responder to Kyles Lane to make the turnaround to go south to come back north in order to access something on the northbound side, then we need to make sure that there's not construction taking place in the design and development of the roundabouts that would obviously then would hamper. We're sending a first responder out of one construction zone into another construction zone, causing another delay. So one of the things that the KYTC has agreed to do is have a communications person that's going to communicate on a daily basis to us for the first responders' benefit, where these closures are going to take place, what routes are going to be open, what's going to be accessible, so that we can as efficiently as possible direct those first responders that are either making emergency responses or making emergency transports into Children's Hospital or into UC, as a result of this construction.
I mean,
The good news, in my opinion, is they're thinking of these things, and they're
Right.
talking about these things and trying to plan for not only during the construction, but in the long term. Because I think we've kind of alluded to it here, but I don't know how clear it is to the average person watching this. As part of this new design, you're going to have to make a decision. Are you local traffic or are you through traffic? And you're going to have to get into the chute, so to speak, pretty far back. And to Steve's point, then, once you're in that chute, as far as emergency response, are there like cut throughs for emergency access, or how do you eliminate the need to go all the way up to, let's say, Cincinnati State and come back to get to Covington if you're on the wrong side of the expressway or something? So again, I'm really glad that the emergency response folks are having these meetings. They're talking about this because at the end of the day, again, I'm confident we'll be a lot better off when this is all done in terms of folks trying to have local access and so forth. But obviously, safety is the most important thing, and you can't have a 15-minute response time in the event during a serious event because of this new infrastructure.
well, it's interesting because before you made a comment, it may be 2030, but it's almost 2026.
Yes.
Honestly, when you said
Yes.
that, I thought, man, that's 100 years.
Well,
I'm
yeah.
like, wait a minute, that's 4 years away.
Yeah.
So it's really not that far as possibly the overpass work
Yeah,
goes.
and during our discussions, we've talked about the concerns of, you create a break in a barrier, so a first response, whether it be a pumper or whether it be a police unit or whatever, can make the cut. Is how do you prohibit the traveling public from utilizing that when they see? Because we know how that works.
Yeah.
So that's been part of the discussion as well. One of the other things that we've incorporated into these discussions is the possibility of a mutual aid response. If there's something that occurs on the southbound side, maybe our partners in Cincinnati make the response over and either go to the initial crash site or perhaps shut the interstate down so that the first responders on the Ohio side or the Kentucky side can come north on the southbound side if necessary, and vice versa. So those are being discussed. And in addition to that, at a recent fire chiefs meeting, the air transport services that attend those meetings, we're talking about maybe once this project gets underway, having them automatically dispatched to serious injury accidents on the I-75 corridor. So, because oftentimes it's quicker, to load and go with a ground transport ambulance, but it's not quicker to load and go if all your routes are obstructed and blocked. So, we're having those conversations as well about having air care and air methods and all of our air transport companies are going to be part of some initial dispatches as well. And then once the first responders get there on the ground, if it's determined that it's going to be beneficial, they've already been given the advance notification to go airborne. And if they're not needed, they can be disregarded.
Well, this is honestly, before we wrap up here in a minute, this is great news that this much thought is being put into the first responders, accidents, air care, things like that, because while you're sitting here talking, I mean, St. Elizabeth has a hospital right there. I guess, is it still called St. E's North? I go way back when there was a St. E's North.
I think
but-
it's Booth Hospital.
Yeah. St. E. Covington, St. E. Edgewood.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, I mean, is that could play a pivotal role for even some Cincinnati stuff?
Well, that rolls into the plan as far as an LZ landing zone for an air transport. Is if we need to get somebody to a trauma center involving St. E's, heliport, in order to land there, then you have a safe landing zone that you can probably access fairly easy, depending on where where you're at.
Okay.
and then make that air transport from that standpoint.
Well, we only have about a minute left, but I did want to ask, I'm curious, are they still doing the soundproofing walls? I know when I was
As far as I know, yes, that's something we've been concerned about as well.
Okay.
And from the most recent planning information I've gotten from them, yes, that's all still on, which I think will be a good thing, especially for residents who are, whether it's Fort Wright or Fort Mitchell, close to the interstate itself.
Okay. Well, gentlemen, we could talk about this. The time has flown by. We could talk about this for another hour. It's fascinating, and having you here as well with your knowledge of the first responders and how that's all being incorporated. This is so much more going on than just a bridge being built. Yeah. And I learned some things today, and I wish Fort Wright and Fort Mitchell good luck during the construction. I'm sitting out in Independence. I'll be dealing with it, but you're at ground zero, Mayor.
Your residents will be dealing with it on a daily basis.
Oh, yeah,
on the
they love to go through
corridor.
Fort. Yeah, they love to go through Fort
As long
Wright.
as they stop and spend some money, we'll allow it.
Yeah.
He's going to sell hamburgers during the backups.
Hot dogs and hamburgers.
Highway.
That's right.
All right. Well, thank you both. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Chris.
And that's all for this episode of City Talk. You can watch this. This will be replayed on channel 203 on Spectrum, 815 on Alta Fiber, and on demand at tbnk.org. So we'll see you next time on City Talk. Thanks for joining us, and remember, it's your government.